Customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DiJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you're a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution podcast with John DiJulius. This week, we bring back Dave Murray, Vice President of Consulting with the DiJulius Group. This episode is all about building world-class internal culture, building teams that work together, focused on the customer. This session was recorded at the Customer Service Revolution Conference in 2022. Departments operating in solos, poor internal handoffs, miscommunication, these are all employee dissatisfiers and have negative impact on the customers. Join Dave Murray this week to learn how to fix these common pitfalls and get all team members focused on your customer's experience. Enjoy.
Well, thank you all for being here. Holy cow, we had to add some seats, so this better be good. Whew. No pressure at all. So before we start, a couple of great things about today, November 8th. The first thing is, by about 7 or 8 o'clock or so tonight, there should be no more political ads on TV. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. I'm excited about that. And the second thing is, because of the election, my kids are off school because their school is a polling place. So they're in the back of the room. They get to come watch Dad work today. So my lovely wife, Tracy, and Lily and William are in the back of the room. So that's kind of cool to have them here. So let's talk about world-class internal culture. Right? It's obviously a hot button because a lot of you came for this topic. Here's the thing about world-class internal culture that's kind of interesting. At the DiJulius Group, in our consulting practice, as recently as 4 years ago, we weren't really talking about internal culture as we are today. And here's what I mean by that. We had a session, a workshop on internal culture that we did with companies that really focused on leadership. But what we found in our business over time was that where the big issues were departments working with departments, right? Those silos that build up over time, bad handoffs, the ball getting dropped. So we actually changed our internal culture workshop, and we took advantage of a little bit of downtime during COVID as we weren't traveling as much and weren't as busy, and kind of tweaked a little bit. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you, this workshop, is relatively new content that we're out there working with organizations now, but it was developed based on need. It was developed based on the fact that we saw that organizations needed this information because they were struggling without it. So here's what we say world-class internal culture is all about. It's creating an internal experience between team members, right? So team to team and departments that is world-class. Improve communication. We'll talk a little bit about that today, focusing on improving the communication. When we go and work with clients of ours and we say, hey, what's your biggest problem? What do you think they say? Communication. And then we say, what's wrong with communication? Sometimes we hear, oh, there's too much. Oh, there's not enough, right? It's never the same answer, but it's always something about communication, right? So going on with this definition of what we talk about, so improve that communication within departments, locations, other teams. Sometimes that might be HQ to locations out there in the field. Identify all customer segments. One of the things we'll talk about today is if you are an internal support team member, an internal support department, a lot of times people forget that the person that's reliant on their work is actually their customer, right? They just think, oh, it's Fred down the hall, right? It's just Fred. Right? But they're actually a customer because they need your work to then go and deliver something to the end customer. That gets forgotten a lot. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then make sure they know how they impact the external customer experience. Because everyone impacts the external customer experience. Even if they never speak to a customer, they are still impacting the external customer experience. But a lot of times people either don't know it or they forget about it. One of those two things. So like I mentioned, here's what we really focus on when we do this workshop. I'm going to give you a couple of exercises that maybe you could take back to your teams and look to implement, maybe go through some of these things and create some tools like we would with one of our clients. So interdepartmental teamwork and having compassion and empathy, understanding for each other, right? It's real easy to think the grass is always greener, right? And oh, man, service just sits over there with their feet up on the desk, while sales, we're over here working really, really hard, or vice versa. It happens all the time, right? Clarify what those handoffs are. I'm amazed at how many times I'm working with an organization and there's just a simple miscommunication where one department thinks the other department's doing something and vice versa, and it turns out that no one's doing it, right? Because we make assumptions internally, right? So what does that look like in your world? Understand how your work impacts others, especially the internal support people that we talked about. Improve communication, and then a day in the life of colleagues. So if you've worked with the DiJulius Group before, and a lot of you in here have, one of the things we do when we focus on external experience is we create a day in the life of the external customer. All the things that they're going through, all the things they have to deal with before they come into your shop or pick up the phone and call your organization. So one of the things that we do during this workshop is really focus on the day in the life of our internal folks. A great customer experience is powered by a great employee experience, but the problem is too many organizations don't spend time on their employee experience. They're not purposeful about it. It just sort of happens. It's kind of like culture. It just sort of happens. And it might happen well, but it might not be that great if you don't purposefully work on it. So we know that creating this internal culture and creating this focus on the employee experience has to be purposeful. And there's some things that we can do to do just that, right? So one of the exercises that we go through when we're working on this with the client is just that video, right? So the video I shared had a lot of examples, a lot of storylines. Some of those probably seem familiar to you, right? In your organization. They might have happened to you or happened to people on your team, right? So it gives you a chance. And we have to remember that empathy is so important, both for our external experience, but also our internal experience. And we have to remind our team members to be empathetic for one another and be mindful of what each other has going on, right? So the other thing we do is have departments identify who their internal customers are and really understand what those customers need, right? We spend a lot of time and money doing customer assessments in the sales world for external customers. What about our internal customers? Right? Maybe we don't have to go to the same extent, but do we have a basic understanding of wants and needs and their challenges and what their call to action is, what they need from us, what the deliverables are, the timing, those sorts of things. So it's really, really important for us to be focused on that internal experience. Now, I'm not saying you have to go back to your organization and create a really nice video. Those are expensive, right? If you want to, you can. That's great. But you can achieve the same thing just by going through this exercise and having team members talk about these things and maybe even role play these things. That's a really powerful tool and helps you achieve some of the same results. It's just something you can start to do when it comes to your internal culture and starting to focus on your day in the life of a team member so everyone understands one another. Now, the next thing we do when we focus on internal culture is something called negative cues. So again, if you're a client of ours, you know that we talk a lot about negative cues, especially externally, right? The external customer experience, because negative cues can exist everywhere. They really can. And they're not on purpose, but they just kind of pop in, they creep in to the things that we say, body language, and they provide a negative connotation to our customers. They happen internally as well. Let me give you an example. These are a couple of external examples, but they play internally as well, right? So I talked about how they can be verbally happening to us, right? So maybe you called your insurance company one day and they responded by saying, you need to verify your information, right? Pretty standard. You might hear that from time to time. If I change one word in this, if I change verify to confirm, you need to confirm your information, that statement changes its tone ever so slightly, right? But if I change one more word, if I change you to we just need to confirm your information, I take a statement that started off a little bit accusatory, and now I'm advocating for you, right? We just need to get this all taken care of, and then we'll answer your question or get you transferred to the right place or whatever that is, right? It's that simple. And I'm not going to stand here and say that we need to go back and script our people, right? That's not what we want. We want to hire great people and let them go and do their thing and let their personality shine through. But sometimes we just have to build awareness about what those negative cues are and where they can creep in, right? So that our team members know that we don't use words, but that we use words like confirm instead of verify, or whatever that might be in your world. And those happen internally as well. And they probably happen more often internally if we're not careful. So I always show this example when we talk about negative cues, because this sign is in every establishment that serves food and beverage, right? They have to have it by law. They're required by law to have this sign. However, if I walked into this quick service restroom, and this is not a Chick-fil-A, by the way, if I walk into this quick service restroom, they have 1, 2, 3, 4 signs in that tiny little bathroom telling their employees to wash their hands before they walk out of that bathroom, I might be a little worried, right? Maybe I rethink my order. Now, I don't know exactly what happened in this scenario. Maybe the health department did come in and say, you guys need 4 signs. But I don't think so. I think what probably happened is corporate sent a sign, and so the boss said, hey, Bob, we got a new sign. Go hang it up in the bathroom. Okay, boss, I'll put this one right here. And then 6 months, a year later, hey, Bob, new sign. Okay, boss, I'll put this one right here, and so on and so on. And the thing with negative cues is that no one ever, from an employee standpoint, walked in this bathroom and said, do we really need all 4 of these signs? Was this supposed to replace the last sign? But the bigger problem is no one walked in and said, I wonder what a customer would think of this. And that's why the process of going through a negative cue audit is so important. It's looking at your experience through your customer's lens. And in this case, it's your internal customers, right? So if you're a team of supervisors, what negative cues might you be sending down to your team members, right? If you're a department that supports other departments, what negative cues might you be sending across to other team members, right? We hear about those silos that exist. A lot of times it's because there are negative cues that cause them, right? They cause those defenses to go up. So we always recommend doing an internal negative cue audit, right? And again, it's looking at the experience through the customer's lens. So in this case, through the internal team member, whatever team member that may be, right? You can pick and choose and look at different team members and do that as an exercise, right? So that's an important thing to do as well. Here's a biggie: internal communication best practices. So as I mentioned at the top, we hear over and over and over, what's the number one problem? What's the top 2 problems? Usually number 1, always in the top 2, communication, right? We've all heard it. We all know it. I'm surprised that more organizations don't say, but we've created some guidelines. Most organizations haven't, right? It's kind of like this big problem that they can't figure out how to wrap their arms around. So we start to attack the problem, at least a place to start, by creating internal communication best practices. And sometimes they're as simple as doing some of these things, right? Identifying the best communication channel for each team, right? Are we emailing a team that's always up and never at their desks, right? And why do we do that? Well, that's what we do, we email. Well, maybe that's not the best communication channel for them because they're out and about dealing with customers, right? Maybe they should be on text or Slack, right? Meet them where they are as opposed to making them kind of come back and do what we think they should do. All right, so that's a biggie. If it takes more than 3 emails, pick up the phone, right? Having that standard in place. Explain the why. So very often things come across as demands because the team member doesn't really understand why we're even doing this. It seems like busy work. Maybe they don't understand the real meaning behind it, the importance behind it. And be present. Focus who is communicating with you, right? So be in the moment. Don't be just kind of barking orders or forwarding emails. So those are a couple places to start. So you may want to do a little bit of assessment, see how these things are going in your organization, because chances are a couple of these may not be great or may not be consistent, right? And if we can at least get some consistency, that's a great start. So our friends at Alpenhaus, anyone in here from Alpenhaus? All right, we got some in the back. Got a bunch. All right. So they went through this process and they created their internal communication non-negotiable standards. So everyone on the team knows these are the things that we do to communicate. These are our standards going forward. And when you're newly hired, you learn these pretty early on in the game, right? This is part of your orientation. so you're up to speed on how we communicate across the organization. Always be detailed and thorough, using all forms of communication. Be specific, assign an owner. Wow, how many times does an email go out and no one really knows who has to do something and nothing gets done? A specific owner wasn't assigned. Own the task assigned, accountability follow-up with email date. Never assume the person you communicate with knows what you are referring to, right? Speaking in maybe acronyms, bless you, or whatever that looks like in your world. Help yourself to information that's readily available. This one hits home with a lot of people. A lot of people are like, I guess when you say it that way, we do have a pretty robust intranet or all these tools over here that we really don't look at very often. We don't train people how to find the information. And if we trained them on what to do, they could find this themselves instead of making those extra calls and clogging up the phone lines from external customers and all those things that happen when we don't train our folks on that. The subject is not the email. I love that one. And read the email completely before questioning. Right? So there's some places to start. So if you walked into this room today and I said communication is a big issue, and you're like, yeah, it's for us too. Here's some places where maybe you can make some positive change at your organization. Okay? So create your own. That's another exercise that you can do. Go back to your team members, get it in a staff meeting or an all hands on deck, whatever you want to do, and say, where do we have our biggest issues? Where are we dropping the ball? Where do we have communication gaps? And start to create some standards around those to make sure that they don't happen. Now, a lot of times we have organizations treat email on its own, right? Email is kind of its own animal, right? It falls under communication, but email is so big and causes so many issues. A lot of times organizations create a list of email best practices solely onto their own. I love this one. Don't communicate in all caps, right? Don't yell at me over the email. Don't treat email as text messages. That happens more and more these days, right? Email is still a pretty formalized tool for communication, more like a old-fashioned letter than a text, right? So use it that way. Don't deliver bad news by email. This is a biggie, right? Especially internally, a lot of people kind of have that aversion to difficult conversations, right? I'll just send this email and see if they call back, right? I'll just send the bad news, right? But here's the problem. When you send bad news through email, you are not sending any of that other communication, right? There's no voice inflection. There's nothing else that can come across. The person who's reading the email is putting their own tone into that email. So they may be reading it as if you are yelling at them, and that's not the case at all, right? So we always advise, pick up the phone with bad news. Call first. If you have to have an email, kind of a paper backup, an email, an electronic backup, fine, go ahead and do it. Send it as a follow-up, but call first and then send the email. Only CC when absolutely necessary. We all know people that like to CC, just look how busy I am. I'm typing all these emails and I'm CCing everybody. And the subject, again, is not the email. Again, these are simple things that not everyone knows. So you can put them in place in your organization, again, to help build that internal culture. So Bush Funeral Homes, is David in here? I'm not sure if he came. David Napoli is here from Bush, if you see him walking around. They created their email never and always, right? A guide of things that they never do on email or things that they always do, right? To the point of never take more than 3 emails to discuss something, right? If it's going to take that much of a back and forth, just go have a conversation. Pick up the phone, go in person, right? To even remember work-life balance, right? Don't send unnecessary emails after hours, right? So just some guidelines to help people follow and understand what it's like in our culture. So that's another exercise you can do. You can talk about where do we fall short? Where can we help each other? Where can we be working more as a team as opposed to these silos and kind of fighting with one another to create the experience that we want to be delivering externally? Because you have to remember, all these things ultimately support the external experience. And if these aren't happening well, the external customer experience will suffer. There's no doubt it will suffer. So we need to be focused on these things. Who in here has invisible service providers in your organization? Who doesn't know what I'm talking about? All right. So an invisible service provider is someone that provides service but is never seen by the customer, right? Right, so the customer never sees them, but they provide some important services. Might be someone in billing, right? Might be someone back of house that packages, that ships. The staff probably thinks, oh, they're just out there having fun. They're stopping at Starbucks, going to their next delivery, right? They don't know what it's like to be dragging boxes through the snow and those harsh winters you have in Providence, Rhode Island.
Want to improve your company culture and become the brand your employees and customers can't live without? Email Claudia at DiJuliusGroup.com to find out about consulting, executive and online training, and other resources we can offer you. You can also schedule a call with Claudia by going to tdg.click/Claudia.
But here's something that's important to remember. I love this quote from Ron Zemke when he said, your customer, whoever benefits from the work that you do, and conversely, suffers when your work is not done well. That's your customer, right? And a lot of times, people that work internally need to be reminded of that. It's real simple to forget that. A great example, and I hate to pick on specific departments, but a great example are our friends in IT, right? IT gets a bad rap because I call IT and they tell me, did you turn it on and off? Right? All right, I'll get to you when I get to you. I'll be there, right? It happens, right? You forget who your internal customers are. They are there to serve the internal population of the organization. They forget. I love this quote too. If you're not serving the customer, you better be serving someone who is, right? So is your internal culture built on the fact that, hey, I don't serve customers directly, but I support people that do. And that's really, really important. And this last quote I have that I love, your customer is whoever is dependent on the work that you do. It's not as much as that last one, but it's a great reminder. I love that one. If you have an internal team that doesn't work with external customers, I'd hang this up on the wall, right? Just reminding them. So Ari, here's the story that I was going to share that's similar to your driver story. And some of you may have heard this before. So my boss, John DiJulius, who I think you all know, he spoke this morning. When he was in college, he went to Cleveland State University, which is about a mile down Euclid Avenue from here. When he was at Cleveland State, he had a job where he loaded UPS trucks. He was a loader, right? So he would show up at 5 a.m. and he'd load UPS trucks. The drivers would come in at 7:30 or 8, and they would drive those trucks all over town and deliver, right? He was a college kid. He didn't really, know much about it. He just went in there and did his job. He worked for 3 hours a morning and then went to class. Sometimes he'd, be bright-eyed and be ready to go. Sometimes he'd come right from the bar. He was a college kid, right? So anyway, one day he's working. This UPS driver comes in and he's fuming. He's yelling at John. And John's like, he's thinking to himself, what's your problem? Because for him, UPS drivers, they were like gods, right? They made a ton of money. They had great jobs. Like, what do you have the best life. Why are you yelling at me? John just didn't get it. It wasn't until a few years later, after he graduated college, he took his first job as a UPS driver, right? So UPS hired him after he graduated, and he was out one day delivering around Cleveland. He's on the west side of Cleveland in the morning. He's making his deliveries. He's moving. He's feeling great. He's running fast, making all his deliveries. He gets to the east side, and he's got like an hour left, and it's 2:30 in the afternoon, right? So he calls his wife, and he's like, I'm going to get done early. Let's cook on the grill. I'm going to be home early. This is great. I'll see you in about an hour. I'll be home by 4. He's super excited. He goes to his last delivery, and what does he see on the floor but a package that was buried under some other packages that should have been delivered on the west side of town at 10 this morning, and it's 45 minutes in traffic the other direction, right? So now he's got to drive cross town, drop this off. It's late. Right, so the customer's already upset. It's supposed to be there at 10 a.m. He drops it off at 4, and then he has to drive another 45 minutes back. He's not going to get home until his normal 6 o'clock. That's when he understood why that driver was so mad at him years before. Because that loader, the loader's customer, when John was a loader, the customer was the truck driver. But he didn't realize it. He didn't know. He just put stuff in the truck. UPS never told him that your customer is the driver, and here's why they need you to do a good job. And if you don't, it affects them. It also affects our external customers. delays, etc. Right? So maybe you need to go back with your teams and make sure they understand who their internal customers are and how they affect the external delivery of service. Because if you're not careful, it happens way too often. One other thing that I want to share with you that I find kind of interesting is team building. What sort of team building are you doing? And here's why I ask this. Because as we get out and working more and more after COVID, 2022 for us has been a really busy year. We're back in person, traveling a lot, working with companies. What I hear a lot, though, when we talk about internal culture is team building comes up, and I hear this. Yeah, you know, we used to do stuff back in 2018, 2000. Yeah, we used to do great stuff, right? A lot of those team building events before COVID haven't come back, right? They kind of fell off the radar because of budgets or because people were scattered and remote. And a lot of them haven't made it back yet. So maybe if that's your situation, you may want to go back and kind of do a little inventory of budget and team building and what maybe you could be doing, whether it's for the entire organization or by departments. But a lot of organizations are suffering right now because that team building opportunity has not come back. So I just kind of throw that out to you as a cautionary tale that maybe that's something that fell off the budget and you're like, oh, we'll just keep it off the budget, right? And a lot of organizations are budgeting right now. So maybe you can work that back into your 23 budget because a lot of team members are asking for it, right? Sometimes it's in-office things. It doesn't even cost anything but time. And then sometimes it may be out of office and some expenses. So that's something to have you go back and take a little inventory of. How about your internal handoffs? Who in here has organizations where a customer at some point goes from one team member to another team member, one department to another department in your organization? Sales to service is one that really comes to mind, a lot of you, right? But sometimes they're more subtle, right? Sometimes it's to billing, sometimes it's to support, sometimes it's maybe just calling in with a question. But a lot of times there are handoffs. And so what do your handoffs look like? Because what happens in so many organizations is that's where we drop the ball. Again, I brought it up earlier. We make assumptions. We assume one team has that covered by the time it gets to us. And the other team assumes that you're going to tell them as soon as I get them over to you, and it winds up somewhere in the middle and goes nowhere. So the Alpenhaus team, I'm going to share a quick video. You've seen this before. Some of your coworkers star in this video. But here's a look at what an internal handoff could look like. And then we'll talk about what does it look like in your world. Okay, let's watch.
Good morning. It's a great day at Alpenhaus. How can I help you?
Hi, I'd like to talk to somebody about a boat I saw at the boat show. Yeah, I talked to this nice man named Mark, and I was wondering if he was around. I don't have a lot of time though. I have to go pick up my kids from practice, and my husband is homesick, and you know how that can be. It's like having another kid in the house.
I'd be glad to transfer you to Mark. May I please put you on hold?
Sure, that would be fine, but I don't have a lot of time.
I completely understand. Let me reach out to Mark right now.
That's a training video. Ask yourself this. What would happen in your company right now? If that call comes in and you have to get it to Mark, what happens when that person gets it to Mark? Does Mark share any of the great information that he has? He has a customer that's really interested in this boat. She saw her at the boat show and she's really interested. She's a hot lead, but she doesn't have a lot of time, right? And her husband's sick. Does that information go? Or does it just go as a blind transfer, a cold transfer over to Mark? And then Mark has to start all over. That's an example of what could be a traditional warm transfer versus a cold transfer. But the problem is a lot of organizations get focused on the external experience and they make sure that we never cold transfer an external customer, but they don't necessarily have that also trickle down to internal communication as well, right? And so sometimes we focus on things externally, but they don't make it into our internal part of the culture. So ask yourself, where might we have some opportunity to make sure that we are doing things like warm transfers internally, sharing as much information as we have to set that other team up, that next team up for success, as opposed to just getting it off our plate and on to the next thing that we have to deal with. which is what happens in a lot of organizations, right? And so you can combat that by making sure people understand, again, that teamwork, and they're focused on that teamwork. Again, so just another great opportunity. So where are your handoffs? Another great exercise. Where are your internal handoffs? And how can you alleviate some of the problems that are currently occurring? And I'll guarantee you, if you have handoffs, you have problems. They exist. You just got to look for them. They're there. Trust me. Another thing that we do during this process is internal journey mapping. Okay, so one of the things we do is we identify those handoffs or other places where our team members communicate with one another or are working internally, and we work on them in 4 buckets. Okay, so we really dissect the experience with the goal of creating a playbook so that we have a consistent experience internally. So here are the 4 buckets that we focus on. Service defects. At this particular interaction point, whether it's a handoff, whether it's a transfer of information, whether it's just a new sale coming in from the sales department to service, whatever is in your world, what are the things that can and do go wrong? Now, we can't necessarily completely eliminate those from happening. There's always going to be a human element, human error, but we can build awareness, just like we did with our negative cues. We can build some awareness and maybe lessen them from happening, right? And also make sure that people understand they're going to happen and be looking for them, as opposed to maybe being blindsided by them if they're not aware, right? So where are the defects? What are the operational standards, right? So what are the things that we have to do to get the job done, right? I have to get the customer's number, get the account number, look up their CRM, whatever it is, right? What are the things that I have to do at this particular interaction to get the job done? The next one is the important one, especially for the internal culture, because we say, all right, where can we build some experiential standards in here too? Where can we make it just an overall better experience? Right? Where can we use things like personal information, things we learned at a team building event internally, even just using the person's name because that's such a great way to build rapport. Right? As opposed to saying, here's another order for you, see you later. Asking about their day, using their name, saying hello, small talk. It's so important internally. So these could be really, really simple things and easy to execute. And the last column, as you see, is where can we make some overall improvements, right? It's kind of like a parking lot, right? Maybe we need some new infrastructure. Maybe we need that CRM upgrade that we've been talking about for years. Whatever that is, right? What are some improvements that we can make to the overall experience in this particular internal communication? So what this actually looks like when you go through the process and do it looks like this, right? We put those up on the wall and we have groups walk around and talk about it and dissect it and write it out. And then what we do is we get a smaller team together, kind of a steering committee that oversees this, and we identify what are the priorities, what are the ones that are going to make the list, become our playbook, right? So what are the defects that we want people to be aware of, the 3 or 4 most important ones to be aware of? What are the operational things that we need to have happen every single time? And then what are the experiential that we want to add in there and have happen every single time? And then what are the improvements or, as you see up here, above and beyond opportunities? Where can we make this even a little better, right? So that's a process that we go through with our clients to really focus on that internal culture and create a culture that your team members are proud to be a part of. That's the biggest thing, right? If they're not proud to be a part of your culture, they're not proud to work for your organization, what experience are they going to be delivering internally and externally?
We appreciate your reviews. Please be sure to share your comments and let us know what you're enjoying most on the podcast. And to hear more episodes, be sure to subscribe now on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening and being part of the customer service revolution.